Before we begin today's session, please know that all of us at NYU hope you and your family are safe and well in these unprecedented times. The NYU Alumni Association represents nearly 600,000 alumni all over the world. On average, we host nearly 700 events annually to connect you with the NYU alumni community all over the world. In this time of uncertainty, we are so thankful you have chosen to spend some time with us and continue learning from the collective knowledge of our NYU community by tuning into today's session. Sherif Barsoum is the Associate Vice President of Global Services at NYU, and Chloe Demrovsky is the President and CEO of Disaster Recovery Institute International, as well as an adjunct instructor at the NYU School of Professional Studies Center for Global Affairs. Today, they are interviewed by Student Alumni Council member Julia Lee on the impact of past disasters on education and the previous lessons learned that can help us as we now navigate through the COVID-19 crisis. If you have any questions during the session, please enter them into the Q&A box on your screen. We will get to as many questions as time permits at the conclusion of the program. Sherif, Chloe, and Julia, thank you for joining us today. I now invite Chloe and then Sherif to introduce themselves.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. It's a great pleasure to be here, and thank you to Tatiana for the introduction. As well as being on the adjunct faculty at the Center for Global Affairs, I'm also an alumna of the program. So it was a pretty fast turnaround. I graduated in 2013 and started teaching in 2014, and I've been there ever since. So in some senses, you can say that I just love the NYU community so much that I never left. And I've been really there from 2010 to all the way through today, so a decade now. So it's been great. I'm really delighted to be here to talk with you all. At Disaster Recovery Institute International, we're a nonprofit global institute that trains and certifies resilience professionals. These individuals carry our credential, but they work at every major brand name you can think of, you know, from Amazon to Facebook to Bank of America to NYU, right? So these are the people who work on resilience plans and continuity so that these organizations have some strategies already in place for some sort of disaster that could take place. That could be a natural disaster, a cyber attack, and it could be a pandemic. And so here we all are seeing continuity in action, and these resilience professionals have been working hard all over the world. We're trying to collect what they learn and turn it into best practice so that we can all benefit from it. So I'm delighted to be here today, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. I'm Sherif Barsoum. I'm Associate VP for Global Services at the Global Services Office at NYU. And as you know, we have about 15,500 international students that are currently studying at NYU, plus another at least 6,000 international students who are on OPT, which is the work permission after graduation. So we serve a large population of over 21,000 internationals, along with doing all their visas and immigration paperwork for not only the international students, but also any of the faculty who are teaching at NYU, and also working with global programs to do the visas for any of our students who are going abroad to our 14 or 15 sites around the world. So this is kind of what Office of Global Services does. And I'm very happy that Tatiana and everybody from Alumni asked us to come in and talk for a few minutes with everyone here today.
Awesome. Thank you guys for your introductions. So with that, I guess I'll ask you the first question, and this is for both Sherif and Chloe. What lessons have been learned from past disasters and their effect on international learning?
So Julia, I guess what is happening now is nothing really new. Of course, you know, the pandemic is new, but we've had pandemics before. For example, we had SARS a few years ago. We had MERS after SARS. There was, of course, the wars in Iraq, the crisis in Libya, as far back as the Iran hostage crisis in 1979. There was economic collapses in 2000s. in Asia and other countries, also in Venezuela. There was travel bans as late as 2017 by our government. All of these disasters affect students' mobility, and in some ways, in some cases, the reciprocities of visas. So sometimes if we have a conflict with a country and they have a conflict with us, they may not allow visas for our citizens, and therefore we reciprocate and don't allow visas for their citizens, or make it hard for their citizens. So this means that despite the fact that this situation in many ways may seem unprecedented, those of us working in international education, and I've been doing this for over 27 years, have seen many ways, many challenges and that can come up during disasters. We are used to being nimble, constantly aware of and sharing with our communities the changes that are coming from the US government. We try to provide guidance and reassurance to the students will hopefully ultimately lead to a student's ability to pursue their academic career and graduate from NYU and be successful.
Thank you for setting that picture up for us, Sherif. I think that what you're saying is exactly right. This is not totally new. We certainly see that there is an impact on learning from any sort of disaster. So, but what we do see is that the impact does not always fall equally. Those populations who are more vulnerable, who have fewer resources to protect them and to continue their learning, suffer much more deeply than other populations do. So if you take a natural disaster, for example, that's a kind of a discrete community-wide event that you can look at. If you look at a hurricane or something that kind of wipes out a whole area. When something like that happens, often it will disrupt schooling, whether that's at the university level or at the school level, even at the daycare level, right? Learning is disrupted by the event. People can't get to where they are. In some cases, those facilities are no longer there. Communities are disrupted because people are evacuated, and then the social fabric is torn apart. In some cases, those individuals may be permanently relocating from an area if the community has been greatly impacted, and they have to get their lives back in order. And so that can disrupt a child's ability to learn and to continue learning. It can disrupt that family's ability to send a kid to college if they're paying for it, or even just being able to support that learning journey for that student who was maybe thinking of living at home and then going into the school, and then suddenly they can't do that. So this is the type of thing that we definitely see in community-wide disasters all over. It's been well documented. And those families who have more resources, of course, are able to support learning. They're able to pivot more rapidly because you can get something quick, cheap, or quality. You can get 2 out of 3, but it's really hard to get all 3 in any sort of situation. And in disaster situations, that's even more true. So if you have a lot of resources to throw at a problem, you can probably put something together. But if you are lacking in those resources, then it becomes much more challenging. And that is certainly true with a private university situation where we're looking at rather large tuition bills. So it's really important. We know that the value of getting that education plays out later in people's careers, and that there's a long-term value to it. But in terms of short-term stresses, like a disaster, that can really impede people's progress. And if they're dropping out, then they're much less likely to come back. So it's really important to have that continuous learning. And so what's unprecedented here in a lot of ways, I would say, is how fast this has happened and how global it really is. It spread very rapidly because our communities are very interconnected all over the world. We're on planes all the time. We're talking to each other. I mean, my class at NYU, in January, of course, I have students from all over the world who have come to New York to convene in person. And so, obviously I have students from China who were there for the New Year, and then they're coming to school, and right at the beginning of the semester, it's like, okay, do you quarantine? Do you not? At that point, when it was really in China and thought of more of as a Chinese issue, we thought maybe it would be more contained like SARS was. That obviously didn't happen. And it just spread around the globe so rapidly. I think that poses unique challenges. I guess in some ways it will, in one way, I guess if there's a bright side, we're all in it together, right? So everybody's learning is being impacted. simultaneously. It's not like in one community, they're all facing some sort of consequences while everyone else is just going along normally and gaining competitive advantage. Here we see that everyone is being impacted. So I think there will be a lot more care and consideration given. And we're seeing that in everything from admissions to how schools are treating students all over the world. We're definitely seeing that impact. So that's certainly a newer aspect. And then the other new aspect, of course, is online learning. Our massive pivot at a global level, that is totally unprecedented. I mean, these tools have been around for quite a while, but we haven't really wanted to adopt them. It's a totally different learning experience. It's a totally different teaching experience to use Zoom. And I must say, I definitely prefer in person. But I am so grateful that I was able to keep in touch with my students throughout the semester via Zoom, and that we were able to continue our learning and even just checking in together on a human level as a group and coming together and talking about a subject matter. I teach about public-private partnerships, and obviously I weave in a lot of disaster management knowledge based on my professional background. And it just felt so increasingly relevant, more and more relevant every day, because you can't face a pandemic without public-private partnership at all. So it really brought the real world into the classroom in a very unique way. So I was really grateful to have that touch point. So lots of minuses, but some pluses in there too.
Awesome. Thank you for that in-depth answer. For our next question, this is specifically for Sherif, is just how have our professors, they've had to pivot quickly to adjust to this at-home teaching and learning. So how are they and our international students coping with this pivot?
Great question. And like Chloe, I agree. I think professors had to pivot quickly. They've been doing a great job in altering their teaching methods and trying to normalize the situation as much as possible. Students are, as you know, very tech savvy, and most of them have adjusted very well, a lot faster than us professors. And so that's a good thing. Let's see, I did teach a class in Steinhardt in online. Well, we had to switch it to online. And I had, out of the 22 students, I had 7 students that were international. And it was extremely engaging. The students actually afterwards said it was very good. That being said, nothing can completely replace in-person learning. And this is precisely what NYU is also aware of, and of why we are so committed to making in-person learning a priority as soon as we're able to and have clearance from the state of New York and so forth. But I think you know, the professors definitely pivoted quickly. Students pivoted even more quickly. And you know, I've seen people from around the world be on, you know, online in classes and participating very well. So.
Thank you. For our next question is for Chloe. So in what way have institutions, companies, and policymakers been short-sighted on putting safeguards in place to protect themselves against risk?
Well, I think, as Sherif said, this is shouldn't really be a surprise. The magnitude of this disaster is not totally unprecedented, but you know, our closest equivalent would be the Spanish flu. That's exactly a century ago. But pandemics have certainly hit every 100 years or so. You know, every now and again, one just comes through, and they reshape human history. So if you're a student of history, I certainly am. You know that these things can happen. They're not just pandemics, but they're big crises that come through and just create a massive shift in how we do things. But little crises can affect us too, and sometimes the impacts are similar. So I think what we see is that it's organizations, first of all, could have done more, should have done more. They do often have, you know, risk management and business continuity in place if they're large organizations. Emergency response, these things are well studied. They tend to be a little bit under-resourced, except at organizations that experience crises regularly and have realized the tremendous value. they're seen as not revenue generating. So they're on the expense side of the house. And so when times get tough, maybe they look to cut them. Or when a disaster hasn't happened for a while, we think, nothing's happened for a while, so we can save a few bucks there. And then something happens again and you're caught unprepared with resources, if you had them, that are out of date, with tools in place that are not working, or people who don't know how to use them. And this creates tremendous problems for institutions that are trying to react nimbly and fast and efficiently. And you can't do that unless you've been testing and exercising that capacity, and that you have good teams in place to be able to deal with crises. We have a lot of strategies in place for doing this, a lot of best practices, a lot of learning, and a lot of professionals who do this. It's kind of, I sometimes refer to it as the best profession nobody's ever heard of, because they don't really teach it much about it in schools. It's something that people say, oh, I'm interested in, risk of some kind, political risk. And then a couple years out, they end up working in risk management or continuity, something like that. And they're dealing with crises all over. So these people are in place, but they don't necessarily have enough of a voice within organizations. This needs to be incorporated at the strategic level. You need someone who's saying, well, that's a good strategy, but what if it doesn't work? What if something comes in external that we have no control over that totally topples our business model? Do we have any redundancy in place? Do we have any flexibility? Do we have the ability to pivot quickly? How do we exercise that ability? Because we're not going to know the circumstances of some sort of disruption in advance, but we can kind of study categories of effects and have plans for those different kinds of categories of effects. So that's something that's really important. One thing I would just add on pandemic specifically is that, so my organization, we put out a risk and a global trends and predictions report every year, where we survey our community of certified professionals globally and ask them, what's keeping them up at night? What are their organizations most concerned about? And they live in over 100 countries. There's over 15,000 of them. They work at all kinds of different organizations, from big financial institutions to governments to healthcare organizations. And so we're curious, what are the problems you're seeing? And for the last few years, technology has just totally dominated. It's been cyber this, failure of our systems, et cetera. That's really been taking all of the headlines, and that's where all the budget and resources have been going. After 2017, we saw a little bit more of a shift back to, oh, right, natural disasters are a problem because we had that big hurricane season. But pandemics are one of those things that if you talk to the disaster experts, they know that that threat is always there, and that when it comes, it's like really, really, really bad. But it's very hard to take that to an organization and say, hey, I need more resource on this. Because I think the level set is that organizational leaders are saying, yeah, but that's going to affect everybody. So why do we have to prepare? And why do we have to spend resources doing that? Because we'll deal with it when it happens, and everybody will be in it together, and we'll think about that tomorrow. It's never been one that sort of like, we'll get you budget, we'll get you resources, we'll get you the attention of the senior leadership, and nobody really cares about it. Until everybody cares about it. I write for Forbes, I write about risk and resilience. And at the beginning of 2020, I was like, do I put in a mention of pandemics? Because it could happen. Nah, nobody cares about pandemics. Not going to put it in there. Who knew 2020 was going to be that year? So I think that's just something about human psychology and how organizations work that we really have to think about. The truth is that if we take a much more scientific and systematic approach, we can be much more prepared. There are a lot of measures that can be put in place in advance that are useful for any number of potential disasters or disruptions, not just pandemics. And so it's really important to have those in place. What I would say is just one more note of caution, which is that very often we spend a certain disaster or a certain event will wake us up and say, hey, you need to deal with, you were caught unprepared for the pandemic. And then there's a lot of resources and attention to pandemics. And then we're sort of preparing for the pandemic that just happened. And all of our resources going into preparing for the last disaster. The next one is likely to be something totally different. So it's really important to allocate those resources, but to allocate them with some flexibility in mind, understanding that, all of the threats that were here before the pandemic didn't go away. They're still with us. So we have to be more nimble in our approach.
Yeah, so you mentioned right now that there's sort of a hazard by hazard approach towards risk management. So how could organizations move from this hazard by hazard approach towards a more proactive risk management policy?
Sure. So we talk about this pretty regularly, and the thing is that with you have kind of two disciplines. You have risk management and you have business continuity, and it's good to keep them sort of apart, but they have to work together. And risk management is all about looking at potential causes of disruption and either living with it, deciding we can live with it, measuring, could this really affect us, and by how much can we live with that risk? If we can't live with that risk, are there measures in place that we can take to avoid that risk? Let's put those in place. And if you can't, then you're going to mitigate it by maybe insuring some of the risk, for example, finding some ways to kind of share that burden. So that's the risk management side, just trying to prevent something from happening in the first place. And there's a lot that can be done there, from measures. We see a lot with fire safety, for example, with pandemics, some things we maybe forgotten in a place like New York City after, when tuberculosis was spreading all over the city through the tenements like wildfire, they started putting in regulations about how small apartments can be. I think that we've forgotten some of those basic public health measures that we probably need to be looking at: more outdoor space, better ventilation, and so forth, that are just basic public health measures. So there's more we can do on the risk management side, definitely. And then there's the business continuity side, which is about dealing with effects. So assume that your risk management side totally failed and something happened anyway. It's not because it happens, right? It's not because they didn't do their job, but you have to have this other planning mechanism in place that says, okay, we did everything we could. It happened anyway. We need to have some preparatory measures in place in case that worst case scenario happens. And so what are we going to do about it? Let's just assume it happened. Let's assume that NYU loses a whole building, right? What do we do about that? Where can we relocate? What does that look like? Or we can't access our facility, or all of our systems go down university-wide. How do we get the information out? How do we contact people? How do we protect student information, and so forth? There's a lot of kind of categories that you can look at and say, okay, this could happen. I'm not sure exactly what the trigger event would be, but what I'm going to focus on is, what are my core competencies? What are the resources that I really have to protect? Who are the core, who are the groups that I have to protect, and what are their potential needs? And how can I make sure that those needs are met even under duress? It's things like planning for who's going to lead this, right? Making sure that you have a variety of personnel across an organization who are prepared to take on leadership roles in crisis in case somebody's not present. When something happens, you can't have that one person who you're relying on. Maybe they're on vacation across the world when something happens. You need somebody else there. So there's a lot of good best practices that you can have in place that are going to make an organization more flexible, more nimble, and more resilient in case of any type of hazard or threat that could face us, because we can't exactly predict what the next threat will be. But what we can control is our preparation for it and then our reaction to it.
Yeah, thank you. So for our last question, it's for Sherif. We're wondering, what is the strategy going forward at NYU for international students?
So before I even answer this question, the number one thing that international students have to do is to look on our website and check our website constantly, ogs@nyu.edu. That's where we have all the information. We update it all the time whenever we have new regulations or immigration changes. So please look at the ogs@nyu.edu. We realize, though, that some students will experience difficulty being able to travel to the United States by their program's start date. So September 2nd is when we start. If a student is not already currently within the United States, obviously they have to get plane tickets and come, and we know that plane travel is right now very difficult. So we understand that. For this reason, we're in the midst of adjusting many I-20s for students that are unable to arrive by the start date on their documents, and have been developing further online resources. Like, for example, we have a page called Submitting U.S. Entry Plan Information. So if they go to the submitting US entry plan information, they can tell us when they're expecting to have a visa application at the consulate, for example, in China or in Brazil or wherever. They can submit that to us, which allow for students to both notify us of their updates and request a new document from us if it's needed. And also check our COVID-19 page. That's very important. On our OGS website, there's a really good COVID-19 page that has many FAQs, questions and answers. So I encourage people to check that out. If students don't and can't arrive in the United States by the program start date, as indicated on their current I-20s or DS-2019s, or they plan to defer to a later session start date, we must change their start date listed in their documents and send them an updated I-20. And the good news is that we can now, and the government has allowed us to send new I-20s electronically. So we don't actually have to UPS anything over. We can just make the changes online and send it electronically. Even if they are taking the NYU Go Local option, or if they are starting their academic program remotely outside the United States, we can still send their new I-20s there. Another adjustment that we've made for the fall is that all orientation sessions for international students are going to be offered online. So we will have no in-person orientation, but everything is going to be on Zoom. We'll have a self-paced module that students can complete whenever is most convenient for them, and hopefully they can complete it before even they enter the United States. In addition to that Zoom meeting where students will have the opportunity, another Zoom meeting, 2 hours, we'll have the opportunity to meet other new international students, and we'll go over the cultural adjustment, safety and security, classrooms in US, safety, things like that. All of this information will be posted on our International Student Orientation page on our website by early August, hopefully the first week of August. Given the health concerns surrounding COVID, however, we are also continuing to offer over 100 Zoom appointments each day to students, and those fill up quickly. So I would highly suggest that people do look on our website and schedule a Zoom appointment if they have questions. We're adding Zoom appointments all the time, so that even though you may not be able to talk with an advisor face-to-face or in person, you can at least talk to them online on Zoom appointments and get some one-on-one guidance. So that's kind of what we've been doing. And I'll tell you, the Zoom appointments have been full. Every day we see at least 100 students in Zoom appointments. So we have a large population, and we're trying to add more Zoom appointments. Sometimes we go up to 120 Zoom appointments per day. So that's the good news.
Awesome. So we have a few questions from our attendees. So we're going to move into the Q&A session. I'm just going to ask them. The first question is, how can alumni support our international students during this time?
Yeah, I think, well, if I'll just speak to the part where if alumni are in the United States and maybe have openings in their careers and their jobs, is to interview and offer positions to some of our graduates. We have many graduates who are on OPT and have an employment authorization document in the US, and they can work in the US for at least a year and sometimes up to 3 years. And so hopefully they can interview some of our wonderful candidates who graduated and can offer them positions in the United States or even abroad anywhere.
I've got something to add to that. I think that's great. First of all, offering career advice, internships, jobs, all of that coming to NYU and hiring our brilliant students. The other thing, of course, would be it's a great time to support your alma mater and donate, because all of these extra measures are expensive and revenues are down, and it's expensive to respond to this and take care of students effectively.
Yeah, for sure. Also, our next question is, how has NYU's experience guiding students through the 9/11 tragedy informed how we approach crisis and risk management?
Chloe, you want to start on that one?
Well, sure. I can talk not so much to NYU specifically. Maybe Sherif, you can. I wasn't at NYU at that time, but what I can speak to is how it's kind of generally impacted the city. I'm a proud New Yorker. I love this. I love the city, and organizations within New York and kind of our thinking around responding to disasters. So I'm happy to approach it from that perspective. 9/11 was really a catalyst moment within the profession of continuity and disaster recovery, or whatever, what have you. It really kind of shook the world and shook a lot of businesses. And I think because it hit at kind of such a symbol of the private sector, it really took off as a discipline within the private sector in new ways, saying, you know, what we sort of have known for a long time, which is that a first responder is not going to be the first face that you see in any type of crisis. The first responder is going to be a family member, a coworker, a friend, a neighbor, right? So we all have a role to play when disasters strike, when there's some sort of crisis. The professionals are kind of, they're going to come in a little bit later and deal with the problem that's happening. So we all have to do something here. And I'll give you an example of, so with when 9/11 happened, where it happened was actually where the mayor's bunker was for responding to any sort of crisis that happened within New York City. There's like like an underground bunker where the mayor goes and has representatives from all of the different agencies to help them manage the crisis. It's their emergency operations center. And that's where he's doing press briefings from here. She maybe, hopefully one day. That's where they do all of this from. This bunker spot was in the World Trade Center. So that felt uniquely vulnerable. After that, it moved across the river to Brooklyn, because the thinking was, okay, we've diversified a little bit. It's at least not in Manhattan, which is, more of an epicenter for something like this to occur. Now it's over the river. And so we're learning and from our kind of past mistakes and sort of incorporating them to be more flexible. So now that situation is in Brooklyn Heights. A lot of other organizations learned similar lessons, and they relocated sort of their backup sites, right? Where employees are going to go and report in to work to try to deal with any sort of fallout or crisis. They said, okay, those probably shouldn't be in the financial district. They should probably be somewhere close by. So a lot of them went to like Jersey City or Westchester, somewhere kind of nearby. And so the thinking was, well, employees can still get there if there's some sort of crisis. And all the thinking was informed by that last disaster. So then you fast forward to Hurricane Sandy, and suddenly it was a community-wide thing where the power was out in all of those places. And of course, transit wasn't available to us because it was a community-wide disaster. So all of those things that we kind of put in place as a result of 9/11, we were seeing some of the ways in which they didn't work so well in Hurricane Sandy. Of course, we learned a lot more. We had a lot more resilience plans and strategies in place. There were a lot of heroic things like NYU Langone, for example, the stories of them carrying preemie babies downstairs and issues like that. We certainly learned about, where generators should go and so forth. So we kind of learn about these, every time we do this, every time we go through something, we get a little bit better. Now fast forward to this, and it feels very different because instead of kind of coming together after a crisis, we have to come together by staying apart, and that feels very, very strange. After the blackout of 2003, I walked across the Brooklyn Bridge with my family to see my family that lived in Manhattan. At the time I lived in Brooklyn, and it was teeming with people, and there were vendors on the street trying, like cooking food for people because there was no power, and it kind of felt like an event. After Hurricane Sandy, same thing, got on my bike, could volunteer, could check in on family members, and again, just biking across because again, I couldn't take the trains. Now, I did walk across the Brooklyn Bridge a week ago, and there was nobody on it. I've never seen that. That was crazy, not even in the middle of the night. And it was a beautiful day in the middle of summer when it would normally be teeming with people. So it feels a little different. Social distancing feels different. But I still think some of the principles are the same. Checking in on vulnerable people, checking in with people who you wouldn't otherwise check in with, trying to stay connected to your community, to your organization. For a lot of us, for all of us here, that's NYU, staying connected becomes really important to combat any of the secondary effects that can happen through prolonged crisis. So I think that there are a lot of lessons to be learned from every tragedy. And I know we'll certainly be learning a lot from this one. And I'm hoping that we will experience a beautiful period of innovation and resurgence and rebirth out of this. We just have to get through it.
And there's no doubt that we weren't as prepared in 9/11 as we are now. I think we're definitely much more prepared now. For a small example is that we were at OGS itself. We were able to turn around our advising instead of face-to-face to Zoom advising within one day and send out all international students an email saying you can do advising online and here's how you do it. We were able to send out any I-20s, UPS all the I-20s within the first couple of days and have a mechanism on an e-form where students can email us and say, hey, could you send me this I-20 or that? So we were able to do that very easily. Everybody went home. We have 40 people working in our office. Everybody had the laptop. Everybody, we bought everybody printers so they can print from home and send things from home so they don't actually have to come into work. So things like that, we were much more prepared for this time than before, that's for sure.
Awesome. So our next question is, are there ways our current situation has created opportunities for positive change, such as in the online education space?
Yeah, no doubt. We've seen so many, even, just programs and programming for different student clubs and other things like that. We've seen a lot of, just like what we're doing right now even. We can reach more people, I think, sometimes online and on their own time. Before that, we never really thought about it as much, Chloe, what do you think?
I totally agree. I mean, it seems like a strange thing when we're dealing with something so awful, right? There's a lot of pain and tragedy and uncertainty, and none of that feels good. But if you think about, again, history, so many of the most beautiful things that we've experienced have emerged from something terrible, right? Have emerged from some crisis event or some tragedy. We humans can get a little bit set in our ways, maybe a little lazy, maybe a little comfortable. And so when something comes along and shakes us up and takes it away and causes constraints, that leads to creativity. That leads to new ideas, new innovations. It forces us out of our habits and out of our ways to try something totally new. That has certainly been online learning in this case. I'm sure there will be a lot more things that come out of this. It's still early days, I'm afraid. Like, this is not going to be over immediately. We've got a ways to go. But I do think that, we can look forward to, I think that this will honestly shape the decade. I think it's it feels meaningful that this is happening in 2020, that it will shape the new 20s, and that hopefully, certainly they will not manifest in the same way that the 1920s did. I hope not. But we will see that this will be kind of a catalyst event that will set off a lot of other events. Nobody can predict what those will be, but there will be lots of other things that happen. We're already seeing this with social change, social justice conversations, protest movements. I mean, if you study the way that these kinds of crises happen, that's kind of inevitable. It's part of the playbook. It's like, oh, okay, people are gonna feel uncomfortable. They're gonna feel uncertain about their future. They've lost their jobs. You're going to see social unrest. Again, the effects are going to be unequal. They're going to hit some people much harder than other people. And so people are going to rise up, and that's going to be a problem. And something like a pandemic, that makes me particularly nervous, because I know that it's outside and that's good and people are wearing masks, but it's still a lot of people congregating together, and that is risky behavior no matter what. So that's challenging. However, it is leading to this kind of conversation that we definitely weren't having as loudly or as actively as we were before. And that's just the beginning. We'll see a lot more of that kind of thing. So whether it's kind of using new tools and new ways, or having different kinds of conversations, or leading to some sort of broader social reform, I think a lot of effects are going to come out of this. The truth about something like a public health incident, especially a pandemic, it's the kind of thing we like to forget. The Spanish flu we don't really think about it that much in history. We think a lot about World War I more than about the Spanish flu, but actually a lot of the kinds of changes that we saw happen after that, a lot of them can be traced back to the Spanish flu, but for some reason we as humans like to forget about these things. So a lot of them may have been attributed to effects of the war rather than effects of the Spanish flu. So I think it will be likely here again that, you know, coronavirus is something we're going to be like, oh, that was awful. And then we just want to forget about it as quickly as possible and get back together and see people again and be in groups again. But it will shape us in innumerable ways that have yet to be seen.
Awesome. Thank you, Sherif and Chloe, for answering all of our panelist questions and also the questions from our attendees. And thank you, everybody, for sending in questions as well. With that, I would close off the Q&A session.
Thank you, Julia.
Thank you. Thank you. On behalf of the NYU Alumni Association, I would like to thank all three of you, Sherif, Chloe, and Julia. Julia for moderating, Sherif and Chloe for sharing your insight and your perspective with us. I now invite my colleague, Amanda Williams, who is the Associate Director for Regional Alumni Programs, to close off our session today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Tati, and to our panelists and Julia, our interviewer. This has been excellent and I think really wonderful food for thought for our alumni, students, and all of our constituents. Now, to you, our attendees, if you are interested in supporting students during this academic year, you can donate directly towards the support of students through the NYU Emergency Relief Fund, as well as a variety of scholarship and program opportunities through nyu.edu/giving. For further scholarly content, please check out our events calendar on the NYU alumni page under Events and Programs, as well as the NYU School of Professional Studies page under Events. Coming up on Monday, July 27th at 6:30 p.m. Central Europe time, we have COVID-19, a conversation with Frank Snowden, hosted by the NYU Alumni Club in Italy in partnership with the Yale Club of Italy and the Harvard Club of Italy. Dr. Snowden is a veteran epidemiologist, a historian, and the Andrew Downey Orrick Professor Emeritus of History and History of Medicine at Yale. Again, thank you all for joining us. We here at NYU wish all of you good health and safety. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.